This video is kindly sponsored by Project Red. Check the link in the description to find out more. This video is made possible by 3D Musketeers, offering full-service product development, prototyping, and production, helping you make awesome from art to part. Links in the description. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's Meet a Maker. Today I'm very, very excited because we have a huge brain here by the name of Adam Haile. How you doing, Adam?
I'm doing good.
Okay.
Didn't know I had a huge brain, but sure.
I did.
No,
I knew this.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing great. As good as anyone can be during these times, keeping myself busy with making lots of stuff.
Yeah, what do you like to make? What are you known for? What do you enjoy?
God.
Tell us.
The what am I known for is always a loaded question with me. Only from the sense that, there's a lot of people that, there's some people where you're like, hey, that's the guy that's known for this. Like, the guy that created the Railcore printer. You're like, he created the Railcore and that's his community. Or today I was reading an article by the guy that wrote the original curl or CURL program that's 10 billion installations on Linux worldwide, and that's the thing that he's known for. Myself, on the other hand, I'm the type where when I get to know something really well, that's when I get bored with it.
Yep, I know that feeling.
So I'm like, cool, I know this, moving on. So there's a handful of things that I've kind of been known for, but it's jumped around. My first real jump into the kind of the maker community was way back in 2012. I had a company that I started with a friend of mine called Maniacal Labs, and we did a bunch of open source hardware, kits and stuff. Predominantly at the beginning, it was all digital LED control, stuff like that. We did a Kickstarter for a product called the All Pixel that did really well, at least as far as I was concerned. We sold that for years, and we became really well known for doing LED stuff, which was a blessing and a curse because I wanted to move on to other things.
Gotcha.
You want to do I have changing interests, very frequently. So I was known a lot for that. We ran that literally up until the end of last year. Everyone seems to be sad when, think I'm going to be sad that I shut it down. It wasn't. It was time. We decided to kind of move on to other things. I mean, I would say we hang out all the time, but we don't because it's a pandemic. But, we still talk all the time with my friend and business partner on that. So I got to be known for that stuff. And then just kind of bounced around with a few other things. Makery that we did sell with that. I got into sort of laser engravers and CNC machines and stuff like that, and really gained an interest in that. So a couple years ago now, we launched the Engravinator, which is a little laser engraver kit. I've got one on the floor next to me. So kind of got to be known for that. I took that to EARF 2019. Yeah. Time means nothing anymore.
The last one? Yeah.
Yeah, it was the last one that actually happened. So yeah, I got to bring that there. To great interest and whatnot. We tried to sell a kit of it. That's a difficult business. It was kind of an expensive thing. It was a bit of a niche thing, but I've still had a decent number of people that I know that have built them just from the plans. So that was really fun. And then, obviously I do a lot of 3D printing stuff. But for me, that's more of a tool than really what I'm I enjoy 3D printers, obviously, but it's more of a tool for me to build other things. And then over the course of the pandemic, I got really into plotters. So behind me here is the Cyber Plotter, which is a 800 millimeter square working area plotter. It literally takes up the entire table behind me. It's enormous. I built another one called the Plot Device, which is a Core XY, very fast, lightweight plotter. And then also in the last year, I started working for LightBurn, which is probably one of the better known laser control softwares out there because we support everything.
And most beloved, I believe. I don't know anyone who talks about LightBurn without being like, oh, I love it so much. Everyone.
Don't get me wrong. We have customers that that hate it for reasons, but those are very few and far between. I mean, in general, we've sort of managed to have this really rabid fan base of people that really love it. because it just does all the right things. So that was, I mean, I went from working at Red Hat on open source software for 4 years, which was at the time my dream job, to jumping into LightBurn, which was just, that was a zero questions that I was going to make that move.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's been awesome, and it's just been literally me and Jason, the creator and owner of the company. I mean, we have support people that are part time, but we're the main full time people on it. So I'm doing dev work for that, and writing code and doing UI stuff and whatnot. So those are sort of the spectrum of things I've been known for over at least the last decade.
Yeah, just a huge variety of amazing projects there. Like, I feel like we should dive into a couple of them because,
sure.
Yeah, like, I don't know. I'd love to talk about, like, your plotters a bit more and the fancy things you've done with, like, compressed air and, like, yeah, I know you've done, like, really interesting things with your plotters that are, quite...
Yeah, so, okay, so I can talk about that. So the cyber plotter, the thing behind me is... Well, okay, here, let me start from the beginning. We'll go back to the beginning.
Yes, let's do it.
This is the Engravinator.
It's so cute!
Thank you. See, that is the reaction I get every time. It is the cutest laser engraver to exist.
Yeah!
So I'd had 3D printers. I started with a MakerBot Rep 2 like back in 2012. And then I got a FormBot, and then eventually I got some Prusas, and it's snowballed from there into a whole host of them. So like, and I'd always been really interested in CNC machines and things like that. And then with the Engravinator, a friend of mine, a fellow Red Hatter, came to me and basically said, I do woodworking. I want to be able to put my maker's mark on my things, but they're often too big to fit into a laser. I want something that I can put on the thing, which is what this is designed for. Like, there's no bed. It's just open on the bottom, and it's meant to just be dropped on the thing, and you laser engrave what you want, and then you move it. Which is why it's small and got the handles and stuff like that. So this is how often I get into projects. Someone comes to me with like, hey, you know about these things. Can you solve this problem for me? So that got me going down that road. And yeah, I think I spent probably 4 or 5 months in Fusion 360, just like going through the designs and whatnot and figuring out how to make my own, motion system and all that. Obviously, much of it is sort of borrowed / stolen from your standard 3D printer stuff. And that was the intent. Like, when I was like, okay, what linear rods am I going to use and what bearing, or, like bearings and pulleys I'm going to use and all that stuff, it was like, what are the 3D printers using? I wanted it to use that stuff. So I ended up, over a few months designing that. And that just sort of snowballed into a bit of a love of like anything stepper motor controlled and plotters and lasers and whatnot. So that was just really fun to design, but it took me a while, and eventually we tried to do the kit, but that's a whole different story. So then that flows into the pandemic started, and I was like, this is cool, but he wanted a small one, but I wanted a giant one. I wanted to do posters, like, full size.
Yeah.
So, and my original thought was, I want this to have a 1 meter squared working area. And I literally started designing that in Fusion. And then I realized how big the machine would be, because obviously it needs to be larger than 1 meter. And I realized it wouldn't fit on any surface in my house. So I compromised and decided that all of the extrusions would be 1 meter. So the frame are 1 meter extrusions, and then you lose about 100 millimeters on each side, and now it's roughly 800 millimeters squared. But when I was designing it, it was I kept joking to friends of mine that it was the spare no expense, sort of the quote from Jurassic Park, the beginning, with John Hammond, I guess. That like I just wanted it to be awesome and fast and crazy. I'd also just got my first like industrial laser at the time, which goes crazy fast. So I was looking for a similar speed, basically like 1,000 millimeters a second if I wanted to. which is
Wow.
dumb. I have no
Yeah.
reason to do that on a plotter, but it was just, can I do it? So
Yeah.
the thing is designed with 2040 extrusions, beefy like 15 millimeter wide belts, NEMA 23 motors, just, giant chunky
Everything.
like I think it's 2.5 Newton meter torque motors. They're done. I actually, when I first built it, the first time I did a speed test of the y-axis coming towards me, which uses 2 of those motors, the entire thing leapt off the table and hit me in the chest.
Lucky you were standing there. Unlucky? I'm not
no,
sure.
I was sitting there. Yeah. Well, because I had it come forward and stop, and the accelerations were set so high that it just flew off the table.
Wow.
So, and the intent with it was, I didn't want it to be like a tool changer, like as in like the E3D tool changer, where it could automatically pick up tools, but I wanted it to be, I can swap out a tool head in 5 minutes, or some nominally short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I designed it with a plate system that just takes 4 M4 bolts, and then you can just bolt on whatever tool you want and then hook it up. It's got common connectors, little PCBs on the top of the tools that break out all the things. So it's got a laser. It has a pen mechanism. I've actually designed like 4 or 5 different pen mechanisms for it, with differing ranges of like the way that they work. It's got what you were talking about, which is an airbrush, which is weird because it
I've
uses.
never seen that done before.
I don't know what got it into my head. I think I had seen someone have like some sort of CNC controlled airbrush, but they were using like an actual like painting airbrush, like a proper one that you would use. But it was like they had to modify it so that it could work, rotated 90 degrees pointing straight down, and they had to do all this stuff with it. And I remembered being in I think it was Joanne Fabrics, which is a craft store here in the States. And seeing this thing,
I dream of Joanne's.
Okay. they're great. I love that store. That and Michael's, I could just walk around there for hours. And I remember seeing in there, they had a little thing that was like for kids, and you stuck your like Crayola markers into it, and it had like basically like one of the air duster cans, and it would spray air over the tip of the marker. And I thought, I can do that. Like, that's not that complicated. So it's set up with
it sprays
just
over
a solenoid
and then
valve.
It makes a spray of the marker. For anyone who hasn't seen this, it's like a spray can kind of deal, but it's using a pen a little bit.
Right. So like in my case, particularly I use Sharpies with it because they've got a nice big chunky tip. And as the air sprays over it, it pulls the ink off of it and onto whatever you're trying to airbrush. So yeah, I set up with that, and it's literally just a Sharpie at an angle and a nozzle, and the nozzle is a 3D printer nozzle. Because why not? Like, I wanted to be able to have different nozzle opening sizes, and well, you can get an M6 thread 3D printer nozzle for cheap. I bought like literally a pack of 50 of them of varying sizes for like $5 or something. I didn't care that they were of good quality. I just cared that they had an opening of roughly the right size.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if the inside's not super smooth if you're only blowing air
through
it, right?
It
doesn't matter.
Does not matter at all.
Yeah.
The only like downside to it is like the path between the solenoid valve that controls it and the tip is like 75 millimeters or something like that, because I had to have a bunch of hardware in between there. So there is a slight delay between turning it on and whatever, and like turning it on and like ink coming out, because also it takes a little bit for the ink to kind of start flowing, and there's things like that. That's easily fixed in software. I just add a delay, like turn on then start moving kind of thing, instead of just immediate. So yeah, that was fun. That's definitely one of the ones that has gotten sort of the most interest, just because it's weird and different and looks cool. And actually that's one of the reasons why it ended up being called the Cyber Plotter, because I was playing with fluorescent Sharpies, and I was like, you know what this needs? This needs UV lights. So on the plotter I installed white lights and then also strips of UV lights that are software controlled.
No way.
Yeah. If you go to my Twitter, the banner, it's Dreadmaker Adam on Twitter. The banner is a picture from the Cyber Plotter with the UV lights on and fluorescent ink and stuff.
That is too cool. I am going to grab a link to that and put that in the description because that is
cool.
so cool.
Yeah, so I was just like, okay, well, this looks super cyberpunk. I think it was also around the same time that like there was like a bunch of stuff about the Cybertruck, and I was being cheeky about it. But yeah, so that definitely was kind of one of the more fun things. I'm trying to think what else I added on it. I did play with a drag knife on it, which kind of worked. Mostly I've done plotting stuff and the airbrush and whatnot. And you occasionally a laser.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, you mostly plot using LightBurn, don't you? Which is not necessarily what LightBurn is used for. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do.
On your off time, you make LightBurn do weird things.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's one of those things where you can do it, and like I've instructed people on how to. I am at a obviously great advantage of the fact that when I go, how can I make this work? I can literally look at the code because it's what I do for a living. So, yeah, and I've actually added features because of like the plotters have gotten features added to LightBurn. Like,
yes.
I mentioned I have to add a delay, and like we had it where you could add a delay at the beginning, but not at the end. And I needed a delay at the end. Otherwise, there's like a stroke as the pen lifts. So I started doing stuff like that. There may or may not be more official plotting pen mode things coming to LightBurn that I won't talk about. But we try to make it work as good as possible. And like, as I've talked to you before, like one of the things that with the Cyber Plotter and actually Plot Device, the smaller one, most people when they do plotting, they use the Z-axis, even if it's virtual, to raise and lower the pen.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Which I get because that's what you have. But the thing of it is like I wanted to use LightBurn because I like it and that's what I'm used to. And we don't currently support moving the Z for laser on, laser off, so to speak. As in start drawing, start cutting, whatever it is. We just support, hey, turn the laser on, which is various different G-code commands depending upon the device. So I made a little tiny PCB. It's like the size of a postage stamp that sits between the laser or the laser controller. So like on the big one, it's a smoothie board. On the plot device, it's a SKR mini something. And it basically just takes the PWM signal that's supposed to be for the laser and turns it into servo control.
Gotcha.
So there's just an AT Tiny microcontroller, just one of the little 8-pin deals. And that very just elegant. Goes, oh, hey, I'm supposed to turn the servo on, and it drops the servo.
Nice. Oh, I love it. That's very elegant. Yeah, yeah.
I like sometimes those like, there's software problems that, I mean, yes, in theory I could fix in LightBurn, but obviously wasn't our focus. So I got to work on my actual normal LightBurn things that are laser focused. But if I can fix it with a tiny amount of hardware, like that's fine. That was actually one of those weird products where we were going to sell it through Maniacal Labs, and then like I got the first run of like 25, and I assembled them, and then we decided to shut the business down.
Aww.
So if anyone wants something like that, yeah. I have a box of them just hanging out. But I mean, they're literally like $1 a piece or something like that. Like they were not expensive. We were going to sell them for maybe a couple dollars, like $2-3. They were not an expensive thing.
That's awesome. Speaking of boxes, how organized is your room? That is just gorgeous. Look at that.
Thank you. More and more so every year. I usually in the fall, I kind of have I get something in my head where I have to reorganize. And something changes every year. And this room is weird because when we first moved into the house, it was my office, sort of like there was just the desk that I'm sitting at now, / home theater room. So we had a big TV in here and like the surround sound, and there was a couch in the middle, and I even had a set of actual theater chairs behind the couch that were on a raised platform. It was awesome. They were actually from my high school auditorium where I did a lot of musicals in high school.
Oh, lovely.
They renovated the auditorium when I was like a senior, and they sold off sections of the chairs. So I had an actual set of like, and the theater was built in the 1920s, so they were like red velvet, folding chairs.
Nice, yeah,
really
that's
cool.
Awesome. That's way cooler than my school whole thing.
It's an old school in upstate New York. It's just kind of the way that they did things. Yeah, so I had all that in there, and then like Then I took the chairs out and I put in more storage. You can't see them in frame, but there's like these like IKEA. They're basically 6-drawer dressers, but I use them for storage of things.
Are they Alex?
Yeah. What?
Are they IKEA Alex? No.
No, I think Malm something.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know.
the other one. Yeah.
The Malm ones. They're just basic. They work. And then last year I was like, no, I need more storage, and we ended up just moving all the TV and stuff downstairs in the living room, where I guess that stuff's supposed to go. And I put in all of these shelves, and then the thing I did this past fall was, you can see at the very end, is all of those storage bins. So I bought way too many Stanley storage sorters and built a rack with a bunch of 3D printed rails. So now, like, I don't have to like lift up 6 bins to grab one. I can just grab one off the rack, and
this is so
nice.
Good. Yeah, like this, I used to have stacks of them, and oh my god, it just drives you. Even if it's too high, you always want the one on the bottom, and you're always like arranging them. It's so annoying. It's so much better to have them each on their own shelf, so you can just pull.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, so worth it.
It's so much better. I mean, I swear I spend 50% of my time making things doing shop infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, this is just shop number 1. Then right below me is my garage, which has like the big tools in it, the laser and all of that stuff. And I've also spent way too much time doing shop infrastructure in there.
You kind of get hooked on it though, and then it just like, it's so good to have everything so orderly and nice, and it just makes everything flow so well. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I've been there.
I mean, it's worth it from the standpoint that then when I go to do something that's not shop infrastructure, I'm not like working around what I have and the things that I don't know where they are, or they're buried under something or whatever. I can get in and just go, okay, cool, I need these bolts, and whatever, I go through everything, build the thing, and be done with it, instead of fighting with my setup.
Yeah.
I'd rather be, and like
running
and
around collecting everything, and then you have this huge mess after to clean up that you all have to put in 50 million different spots, and you don't know where everything goes, and so it doesn't get Yep.
Right. And then like behind me here-ish is the sort of altar to Prusa. It's my stack of Prusa printers. So there's 2 minis and 2 Mark IIIs on there, and then there's a non-Prusa one hiding on the bottom that, shamefully. And then in the closet that's next to it is this weird thing in my office. There was literally a closet with a desk in it when I moved in. I don't know why. Like just like a desk shelf in the middle. So I turned it into a printer closet. So my tool changer and my Daedalus are in there.
That's cool.
Which is
super cool.
Fun.
Yeah, and I need to work out a better storage.
It worked out too because that has its own power separate from the rest of the office.
Oh,
for some reason.
There you go. Wow.
No idea
Maybe
why.
there's a little.
Sorry.
That's really interesting. Maybe there's like a little meth lab in there or something. Like what? That's so strange. Someone growing weed in the closet on a bench top. It's so strange. Why would you?
No idea. I won't question what the former owners of this house did.
Whatever. It's beneficial. I need to work out better storage for my printers because, they kind of just like here, and I've got a Prusa Mini over here now, and like there's a bunch in the garage still. And I've been working on my CR10S5 because I've been installing Hemira on it, but it's just nice. On the floor because it's a giant. The S5 is that 500 by 500 build volume that you can't actually use. So it's just like on the floor because. Anyway, I need to work out a better system. I think I might try and I like the cupboard idea now that you say it, because I kind of have a not well used cupboard space, so I could probably I think that's a good idea.
Have or can get power into a, as you would call it, cupboard, into the closet, like it's great, especially if, and this is one of the reasons why the tool changer and the Daedalus are in there, because those are the machines that I print weird shit with. So like nylon and, carbon fiber stuff and things like that. So if you, or ABS or whatever, I know I count ABS as weird because I don't use it often.
No, it's definitely weird now.
Yeah,
I think it's weird.
Something that you,
it's fumey, if it's so weird.
Yeah, exactly. If it's something that you want to keep drafts away from and you need to keep warm, that closet will get up to 90 degrees or 90 Fahrenheit. It's like one metric thing I don't know. Is Celsius. I know. I know.
Water
I know
boils
them when
at
you
100 and freezes at 0, and everything in between is a mystery.
Right. I know them. I know them once you get into the 200s because I'd use that for 3D printing stuff. But like the ambient room temperature, I never remember.
It's about 24, but that's a weird number to remember. But about 24 is considered comfy. generally.
Right.
But that's Queensland comfy, maybe not comfy for people who live in colder climates. I don't know.
Probably not someone like me who grew up in the north, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, having them in a closet is really great. Like, actually, I think I just saw a video this morning from Zach Friedman. He set up his new stuff in Colorado, and he has a printer closet, and that's yes, printer closets.
I saw the notification. I haven't watched it yet, but I love Zach's stuff. He's just a legend, isn't he?
Yeah, it's really good. I started watching him probably 3 or 4 months ago, and just have been loving it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's having those organized is great. Like, I've got all the filament on top, and just having a nice workflow with that is just key to keeping everything in my life organized. I only have so much time in life, and I have to sleep apparently from time to time.
God damn it. Yeah.
I know. It's the worst thing ever. Sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I think you've inspired me. I think I will do a printer closet.
Okay.
I like that plan. Yes.
Good. The other thing I will suggest when it comes to organization is bespoke project bins. So that's one of the other things that's on those shelves.
Yes.
There is a spot for, like, this is my tool changer section, and this is the plotters. So it's, when I'm done, I can put everything kind of back in that bin or like a little section, and I know where that stuff is.
I cannot recommend that enough. Yeah, I completely agree. I wrote a little post actually recently on my blog about organization strategies because, it's been a journey for me. I used to be absolute chaos and it's not chaos now, but totally agree.
Right.
Project bins, like as in this project is on the go and it will eventually finish. And also task-oriented things like this is all my painting supplies. This is all my bookbinding supplies. So you just pick up that box, do the bookbinding, everything goes back in the box and you don't have to like send everything out into 50 million little drawers. Yeah.
Right. And the only time that gets to be chaos is when I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do anything new with this project anymore, but now I have all of the leftover stuff. Because when I buy things, it's like, well, I need 2 bearings. I'll buy 20. And then they stay in that bin, but then I need to put them back in those Stanley organizer bins. So they're with, the box of bearings and the box of bolts and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I still have boxes of fabric. There's like some supply boxes that are just like universal supplies. But
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's super, super helpful.
Definitely. I'm so with you. Yeah. Oh, it's good to know that I'm not the only person who's worked these things out, and just like, it's nice to know I'm on the same page.
It's taken me my entire life so far to get to that point, but whatever.
Yeah.
It's just God forbid I ever have to move and change my organization.
It's actually exciting. I actually really enjoyed it. I moved not that long ago, and you have like a whole new space to deck out, and it actually becomes like a project of its own, and I quite enjoyed it, to be honest. Like,
it used to be I would have said that, but after nearly 10 years in the same house, I guess 9 at this point, I've gotten to the point where like that seems like a lot of work to get back to the point where I am now.
Fair, very fair.
Sorry, sounded like you had another question, like another topic.
No, it was a tangent. But I was going to ask where you get your inspiration from, because you do some pretty interesting stuff. Like with you said previously that there was like a problem that you wanted to solve for a friend. Is it usually a problem-solving exercise, or do you sometimes just get sparks from somewhere or see something? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm very function over form oriented.
Mm-hmm.
I like things to have a good reason to exist and to solve a problem. So sometimes it's solving my own problems. Like, for example, I'm been working on a PCB design for a stepper motor tester. And that was one of those that I wanted, but then also I've heard a lot of other people in the community like being like, hey, why isn't there this thing? And I'm like, okay, fine, I'll finally make it. Or the thing to go from laser control to servo control was another one of those things. Why doesn't this exist? I want it. But probably 75% of the time, it's someone comes to me with, hey, this would be cool if this existed. And I love those projects, partly because it's weird. It's like somehow because I'm in a way less invested, I can go a little bit more wild on it. Because like
interesting.
I get, when it's something that's for me, I get far too bogged down in feature creep.
Yeah,
like, I'm like, but I could add this, and but I could add this, and like the stepper motor tester thing originally was just going to have an AT-Tiny on it, and now it has a socket for a Adafruit feather board, because then I can use all of the different controllers.
Is this the little one I've seen that you use for testing all the different axes when you're doing LightBurn
Oh
stuff?
no,
Is that the thing I'm talking?
that is the done as one of the guys from LightBurn calls it, the does-nothing-inator. No, that's up on the shelf over there. That is a different thing that I built for LightBurn because it actually has like a DB37 cable, which is like an old printer port cable for those that are old enough to remember those before USB. And it's designed where it just has 4 stepper motors and looped belts, and then little things that you can slide on them to be end stops if you want. And then you can hook that up to, I've got like a Gerbil, a smoothie board, a Ruida controller, a bunch of others, because when I'm testing LightBurn, like I don't want like I always have like a big machine that has that particular controller in it. So this way I just have a stack of controllers in a box that has those connectors on it. I jack that into the does-nothing-inator, and then I can just at least see that axes are moving and that it's kind of doing the basic thing. I can't see that it's actually like moving. I mean, I can kind of figure out, okay, that's moving in a square, that's moving in a circle, but it's enough to let me test stuff.
Yeah. I thought that was so clever and such an elegant solution to what obviously would be a really big problem. Like if you needed a different machine for everything, like, yeah, that would be really hard. And it makes so much sense to just have the little desktop cute little
LightBurn
thing.
supports dozens and dozens and dozens of different controller types. Like I even made one for Jason, like a few months into starting to work for LightBurn. He's like, "That's cool. I need one." Okay, I put one together and sent it off to him.
That's awesome.
Where was I going?
Sorry, you were talking about a different stepper motor tester type thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So no, this is just like a single stepper motor tester thing. So like that was for me, but a lot of times, it's from friends or very often from my wife.
Lovely.
Like I've basically always been a maker type. Since I was a little kid, I've always been building stuff. I've always been doing that. But like, I think when I really feel like I got into what is now the current maker community was probably when I was about 24, 25. And one of the first even like Arduino projects, which I'm so jealous of kids today that like grew up with Arduino. I mean, you can buy a microcontroller that is faster than the first computer I had, like, or the computer I had in high school.
Yep.
I mean,
the computer that sent us to the moon, like.
Yeah, by far. But I mean, like, the new. I don't even know how. No, the new Raspberry Pi Pico is not that fast, but like the new Teensy 4 something is like 600 megahertz, which is faster than the computer I literally had in high school.
Yep.
So I mean, granted, that was 20 some odd years ago, but fine. But like the first Arduino project I got into was we had an old house, like our first house that we bought together. The downstairs was very open, and we always would have like it was just like an open, sort of setup where just rooms flowed into each other. There was no real walls, and we would always have music playing from, I think at the time it was Last FM or maybe it was Pandora or one of those. And my wife said, I really wish that there was just like a sign I could look at to see what song was playing. Because sometimes it's like, oh, cool, what's that song? What's that song? So, and this is just sort of typical of me. I don't like to start easy. Instead of my first Arduino project being Blinking LED, which is what it's supposed to be, it was an Ethernet connected. It was an Ethernet connected 8 by 128 LED matrix display that connected to a client on the computer that was playing the music, that would scrape the window title of I think it was the Last FM player, and then get the title and author or artist of the song, and then display that on the marquee display that was up on a shelf that in that house you could kind of see from anywhere downstairs.
This is so excellent. This is like the greatest idea ever. Because how many times are you sitting there and you're like, oh, what's that song? And then, like, I love that. This is the best idea.
Right. And I mean, mind you, this was like well before, we were streaming stuff from our cell phones to the speakers or whatever, where you could just be like, oh, okay, cool, it's that song. Like now we can do that and it's fine. Or you look on your smartwatch or whatever. But then it was like, if I wanted to change it, I was literally going over to the TV with the computer that was on it and changing the song. And I wanted to be able to just look. So like that was the first one. I mean, there was another, because every electronics nerd has to build clocks. It's just a thing, I swear.
I have recently started seeing the clocks, and I was like, oh, look at that rose engine. That's what I was like. Oh, so
God,
pretty.
yes.
And now I'm like, oh man, I could dive into clock making. This is totally a thing I could get into. And I'm like, no, we can't do it. We can't do it. But also,
right, you'll go down a slippery slope. I mean, right next to me, I have 4 shelves on the wall. You can't see them, unfortunately, and it's got a few dozen clocks on it of types that I've designed, of other ones. So like one of the very first ones I made was my wife, who loves rainbows and colorful things and all those, was like, I want a clock that tells color with time. And I was like, done. So
time with color?
Or, yeah, tells time with color.
Okay, yeah, I guess.
Tells color with time.
I
can't talk. So like, I just made a very, very basic, and I've made various versions of this over the year, but it was a very basic clock that had 3 RGB LEDs. And granted, this was before, NeoPixels. So I was like manually managing them. That the time would fade from red to violet through the hours or minutes or seconds. So like there was literally no digits on it, but like midnight was red, red, red. And I think it was like in the greens or whatever at noon or something like that.
That's so cool.
It was more that you got the sense of what time it was.
Yeah, I think that's good. It's like a holiday clock, like you don't really need to know the exact time, but like a vague So when I was a child, we had a clock and it didn't have any numbers on it. It just had dinosaurs. So I learned to read the time, and it was like, it's just after the Tyrannosaurus Rex or something,
Yeah, half past the Stegosaurus or something.
Yeah, and my parents had to teach me that the Tyrannosaurus was 3 or whatever, like it was really cute. But yeah, I like it. The vague understanding of the time. It's not that important sometimes, but and pretty rainbows, hell yeah.
Yeah. So like that was actually one of the things that got me into doing crazy LED stuff. Again, it's just so like when those like all the digital LEDs, the pixels and dot stars and all of those came out, like I just glommed onto those and I was like, no, I need to do these. That's what the All Pixel, the first major product we did with Maniacal Labs was, where it was. I always used to describe it as like a video card for LED strips, because it supports all of them, like neopixels and dot stars and all of the other weird ones you've never even heard of. And then instead of caring about what the weird protocol for that is, you plug it in via USB, so to a regular computer or your Raspberry Pi or whatever, and then we just had a Python library. Although I think people have written like C++ libraries and stuff for it, because the protocol was just a header and then RGB bytes. It would take that in and then do the right thing to output to the LED strip.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Because, that's so cool. No wonder people because I love the look of LEDs and I keep struggling to get into it. And I have made a blinking one, but the whole thing kind of overwhelms me. And Python is the only language I even a little bit know. And that's just so cool. Oh,
right. Yeah, so like we ended up with an entire huge massive library for doing LED animations and stuff, that eventually kind of got a little bit overbearing. It's kind of one of the reasons maybe Maniacal Lab shut down, but not the only reason. But it was just like, I want to move on to other things.
Yeah. But what a great idea.
It's definitely fun, and there's plenty of especially Python things, like especially even now with some of the microcontrollers. There's plenty of Circuit Python libraries for the LEDs. So you can do really easy stuff. I mean, the downside of those is it's not nearly as fast. I got into really crazy stuff where like I was making displays that had 10, 20, 30,000 pixels because
what did you do with that? For like, I'm thinking like Christmas time, you just entirely cover your house in LEDs. Is this what you would, or was it like
no, I never got that quite crazy. The weirdest Christmas one I ever did was I bought a fake white Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm.
And I strung up LEDs on it in perfect circles at perfect levels. And then I had to figure out how to do polar conical math to map like radius and angle to pixels that were actually on the tree. So I could do animations on the tree itself, like in 3D. It's actually not as hard as it sounds, because really all you're doing is on a disc that just happens to be extruded over a cone.
Yes. No, that makes sense. I can understand. Yep.
See, and I'm glad it makes sense to you, because it took me like 2 weeks to go, oh, this is not a 3-dimensional thing. It's a 2-dimensional thing that's extruded over a point.
To be fair,
it's not.
You explained it to me. If I had to come up with that on my own, I was thinking like I could do chunks out of the top, and like so it's a strip with like lots of triangles. That's where I was going originally. But then you're like, oh, it's stretched, and I was like, yes, now it makes sense.
Yeah. So
it's like one of those 360 videos almost. Like if you ever see them, they're just Anyway. I get it.
Exactly. So then, like, I had to add to the library, like, the ability to, instead of doing X, Y coordinates, you could do, like, R and theta, because, why not? Theta being the angle.
Yes.
So yeah, I would do stuff like that. I also, like, Raleigh, North Carolina, where I live, has a kind of big art scene to some extent. And there was this festival that they would do every year, which I was really glad it started, because we used to have a bitchin' maker fair like in Raleigh, and then that closed down because the guy that organized it didn't want to maker fair.
Sorry,
possibly. I mean, we like the last year I did it, they had like 60,000 attendees or something like that. Wow. I mean, it was not small. It was at the state fairgrounds. It was huge. So that closed, but then there was a sort of arts festival called SparkCon that I got to be involved with. That was oddly enough how I got the job at Red Hat, which is a completely different story. But I started working with them, or with a friend of mine was involved with it, and I started working on that. And they would do all sorts of different things. So there'd be like a theater section of it, and literature, and painting, and whatnot. But then in the conference center of the Red Hat building was the more I think it was actually called Geek Spark. It was like the really nerdy side of it. And a friend of mine was like, hey, you should build some LED displays and stuff for there. So like the first thing that we did, and I did this with my Maniacal Labs business partner, Dan, we built a 2 meter by 1 meter LED display and brought it there, and you could play Tetris and like Snake on it. And
that's too fun.
It had a webcam hooked up so you could see like a pixelated version of yourself.
That's so fun.
And all sorts of things like that. So I kind of got in, somehow I fell into the art scene of Raleigh. It was weird.
That's so cool, though. I love it because you describe yourself as very function over form kind of thing, and then suddenly you're in the art scene. I love that about the maker community, though. I love that it all kind of intertwines somewhere along the way.
Right. Yeah. I like to see things as, I mean, there is more function to them than the form, but sometimes that can be artistic.
Yeah. Even though I love making pretty things, even, putting flowers on random crap, I always think that form comes first, and that function comes first, and that the function designates what the form should be. Like, and I always think that, even with my really pretty stuff, I think I'm like you in that I like the design problem. So I think, even with pretty stuff, it has to be functional first.
Since we kind of segued into the weird Raleigh art scene, this is another thing that is function that creates form. So this thing is the Bixel. Each one of these white things is actually a button on it. They're all made out of acrylic, and I don't have it turned on right now, unfortunately. But there's LEDs under every single one of these.
Oh, that's so cool.
So it's a 16 by 16 grid, and this was actually made through an art grant with Raleigh. So this is kind of one of the weird things in my life that I've been able to say I had a piece in an art gallery for a month.
That's awesome.
Okay.
And is it so people can come and make their own pictures, and then it gets cataloged or something?
There was a handful of modes on it. So one of them was just like a paint, we called it the light bright mode. And as you clicked on it, it would cycle through colors, so you could do whatever you wanted. We had to police that one a little bit. And then there was other games on it. Like I kind of made my own version of like Bejeweled, that you could like, get rid of specific spots and try to get things together. There was a Missile Command game on there, so to speak, Breakout, those sort of things. And somewhere you just, you push on the button and it makes pretty colors and stuff like that.
Nice. That's awesome.
So that was a fun one. And that's one of those where like it looks cool, but everything on that is purely done for functional reason. And those buttons are actually made up by there's a sheet of acrylic, and then another sheet of acrylic under that has larger holes cut out of it, and literally the discs that we cut out of those holes go back into them, and they'll move because there's a little bit of laser curve.
Yes.
Like, so I cut this on my laser cutter.
Yep.
And then those discs sit on top of two tactile buttons. So when you push down on the disc of acrylic, it will click one of the buttons. And then on the inside of that, and I actually have one hanging up on my wall, but it's one of the coolest PCBs I've ever made. It is a 500 millimeter square PCB, single board.
Wow.
That has the 16 by 16 grid of buttons on it. And they're all set up like you would set up if you wanted to like custom build your own keyboard. I spent way too much time on like custom computer keyboard forums trying to figure out like the secret sauce of making a keyboard, which is even weirder because most keyboards only have 100 plus keys and this one has 256.
Yeah.
So it was all built because of that, but it turned out really cool. It took 11 and a half hours for two people to solder together. Like
that's less than I would have expected, actually, to be honest. Like that seems like I actually would have. Yeah, I mean, it's a long time.
Right. I mean, it was 11 hours straight.
You did it straight. Why?
We wanted to get it done. You know, just show up in the morning and
that's
ran
amazing.
through it. I will never ever do that again. But
it reminds me of Simone Gertz's habit tracker. I'm not sure whether they're buttons though on hers. Are hers buttons?
Daily Sync calendar. Those buttons are capacitive.
Right, yeah.
So and we looked into doing that.
I personally feel like clicky buttons would be more I don't know. I'm a little bit into mechanical keyboards, so I kind of feel like a click would just feel better, you know? Like bing.
You may laugh. I literally bought like a dozen different tactile switches. And so I could specifically choose the ones with the best click feel. Yep. Like I even made a little like 2x3 PCB that had 6 of the buttons on it. I took the 6 that I liked the most, and then we made a very small one of these and would show it to people and be like, which button do you like the best? And we took data on which one had the best click feel to it.
So it's actually mechanical keyboard switches then, not
it's not the mechanical.
Okay.
They're like 3 by 6 millimeter tactile switches.
I know
like
the ones.
Tiny ones.
Little I know the ones.
Like they're like, you know, the ones that you get like for a breadboard, like for doing, you know, electronics. They're like half width of those. They're just 2 legs. You know, they're just little tiny ones. But then there's one on each side. I bought a bunch of them actually because I wanted to make I always like making really weird keyboards, and like I wanted to make one that had like honeycomb. It looked like honeycomb and all the keys were like little hexagons, and I was like, I needed really little. Anyway, I know the exact ones you're talking about. Well, actually, you know, Dan, the guy I built this with, he has that little test thing as a macro keyboard on his computer.
Cute. Yep. Lovely.
So like he has it set up to like run scripts when you press specific buttons or whatever on it, and it, you know, goes through the little lighting sequence and stuff like that.
That's so cool. Yes.
But yeah, it's that was a really fun project. So yeah, that was kind of obviously one of the reasons why I was known a lot for like the LED stuff, because when you're doing art stuff. Oh yeah, I guess this came from the original question of why was I doing LED, like so many, you know, such huge LED displays, and it was just I did that for like 5 years, and every year. Well, you got to do something better than last year. Yeah. And I didn't want to make another 2 meter tall display because it weighed a couple 100 pounds, and I had to transport it with a truck. And like that was one of those where people are always like, "You gonna bring it out again this year?" No, I'm not, because it is bolted to my wall.
Pay for it to be brought out. Yeah.
And actually, until I built that printer shelf with all the Prusa's on it, it was there, like just on my wall. But I finally was like, I need this space. So unfortunately, it got dismantled, and you know, whatever. But it's fine. It was 6 or 7 years old at that point, so it was time to move on to other stuff. But yeah,
so cool.
So yeah, that's why I kept building bigger and bigger and crazier displays, and it got out of hand eventually.
Well, I love it. I love what you achieved along the way before it got completely out of hand, I guess. I that button thing, I'm still thinking about it. I'm like, oh, that would be so cool for so many things. Yeah, that's awesome.
Right. I mean, the Bixel thing would be fun to just like have as a thing, and we had people say, oh, you should make that into a product or whatever. I'm like, okay, I mean, productizing this would be a pain, but also like, you know, it was, I think the grant was for like $1,000, and we blew through that and then some. building it. It's not a cheap thing to do, and it took forever. And like, no,
it'd be the coolest thing to have, like, as a coffee table widget, though. Like, it would be an expensive one, but it would be so cool to have, and you could just like have different people make little things and like play games. Like, yeah, I can see that being really fun.
I've thought of doing it. Yeah, it'd be one of the biggest problems when you do something like that, and I found from doing things like SparkCon, is doing stuff that will stand up to the public. So like when we did that giant display, I built an arcade controller, a stick and arcade buttons and all that stuff for controlling it. And the top of it was 1/4-inch thick clear acrylic, because I thought it'd be cool, because then you could see all the electronics inside. By the end of the first day, that acrylic was just spider web of cracks. Because like one of the things is there was a big 60 millimeter button that you could hit. Actually, that was one of the other games, was because at the time Flappy Bird was like the thing. It was popular, and I made my own single pixel version of that, and it would, go through.
Yeah.
And all you had to do was hit that button. Well, of course, little kids, instead of tapping it, smack it as hard as they can, and by the end of the day, it broke. There was another. I may have gotten yelled at by a woman because I swooped up her 2-year-old off the floor because he was walking towards it with chocolate-covered hands.
You got yelled at for that, man? Like, no, what? She was wrong.
And this was like at the time, because we just finished building it, and the diffuser for the lights was literally a bed sheet.
Oh yeah, what? No.
Yeah, and I later on, when I installed it in my house, because I have cats, I put a piece of acrylic over it. But at the time, I hadn't done that. So he's like walking up to it with chocolate covered hands, and I was no. Yeah, it was one of those diving across the floor kind of things, like trying to grab the kid before he did anything bad. But
yeah.
So yeah, building things for that are difficult. And like when the Bixel was in a gallery for a month, they had an opening for it, and it apparently had some issues. But when it was around a bunch of drunk adults for a gallery opening, that's not really surprising.
They may as well be children. Yeah. Have you seen, there's a subreddit actually, Drunk or a Child, and they tell stories, and you have to pick whether it was someone drunk or a child. It's great. It's so great. But yeah, it's basically the same thing. But yeah, that's like a huge thing. So I worked in theater, which making costumes for a while, and that's like the use of those is like they just get used so heavily. So you always have to have like replacements and stuff. And now I work in a makerspace that works at a library, but we make public installation stuff sometimes. And yeah, the public, they're like a thing. Like they're creative, way more creative than the way things break. And you're like, what? Why would anyone even think to do that?
It's like with what I've learned from my years of working in software, of that it doesn't matter how well you test it, someone will find a better way to break it that you didn't think of.
Yeah. I think that applies to so many things, like moderating as well. Like when I moderated the subreddit and the Discord, like you pick moderators because they're generally like decent, good people, but then people come up with all these creative ways to be assholes, and like they're totally unexpected because it's not on our radar. It's like nice
exactly.
People.
You would never think to even do that. Why would you do this thing? Yeah. And that's why, like with software testing, if you wrote the software, you should never be the one to test it. Like fully do qualification testing, because why would you ever do that thing that's going to break it? I would never think to do that, because that's not how it works. Yeah. But then as soon as you get it out there in the public, and I mean, the times that we've had like beta versions of LightBurn out and people come back with an issue, and I'm like, what? Why were you doing that? But okay, all right, I'll fix it. That makes sense. But now that I've seen that someone's trying to do it that way, but it
I would probably be that person. I'm always doing weird things with stuff. That's
fine. I mean, when you've been working on something so long that like you're just like deeply attuned with how it should work, it's easy to overlook how something will be tried. People will try to use the thing instead of actually using the way that you expect them to, which they never ever do. 100%. Especially when it's a physical thing that has blinky lights and is at an art gallery.
Yes, and drunk. Yes.
Yes. Yes, even worse when drunk. So,
yes. This is awesome. I wanted to ask, do you ever have any struggles when you're making things, and how do you overcome them if you do?
all
Yeah.
the time, more this year.
Mm.
Motivation is definitely difficult. Come and gone in waves. Um, yeah, I hit a wall with things a lot. I'm the type though where I design kind of more in my head, and then
Mm.
getting it down on in the computer in CAD is just ancillary to it. I mean, it's a required step before I can actually make the thing. So a lot of time for me, it's going and doing something else, or another project. I mean, I always find it funny when like inevitably people will ask me, "What are you going to do when you run out of projects to do?" What?
Yeah.
That's literally not a thing. Just not a thing.
Yeah.
So like
My
the
boss.
the
Oh no. Yeah.
yeah. So like the stepper motor tester, that was me trying to get over a roadblock with another project. It didn't work.
Mhm.
I'm still stuck. But like
But sometimes it does work, and yeah.
right. It just working on something completely different. I have a tendency to work on really big projects that take forever. I mean, as you've
Mm.
noted from, things that took 11 hours to solder and giant displays and stuff like that. So like I always like to keep around the list of things that are one day builds in
Mhm.
at least as close of a sense to that. So again, the stepper motor thing, I did that in an evening for the most part. That was a couple of hours. And I like to have things like that where it's like, because a lot of times, like, you can very easily just get bogged down in, I don't know what I'm doing. Why do people think I'm a maker? I shouldn't be here, or something like that,
Stop it.
whatever.
Yeah.
Totally don't have, imposter syndrome.
Who doesn't?
You know,
It's like a
I
thing.
know.
Anyway.
So yeah, you get into stuff like that, and, um, having something that I know it's an easy project, and that's fine. It's a low ball thing, but if I can get it done, then it reinvigorates my brain to go and work on the other thing and figure it out.
Mhm.
Um,
Little confidence
so
boost. Yes, I can do
right,
things. I did this one.
exactly. Like,
Yeah.
yes, I'm still good at stuff. I
Yeah.
know how to
Yeah.
do that, and I can make things. So
Yeah.
that really helps, at least for me. Yeah, I love to tell people, oh, go and do something else. There's literally nothing else I do. I mean, uh, uh, I mean, there are, of course, I spend time with my wife and playing with the cats and our new puppy and I have normal life things that I do, but when have time to myself, I'm working on projects.
Yeah. Yeah.
Working on one thing or another. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't have built all this and the workshop and office if I wasn't really into that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, just working on something different that's just an easy win can kind of get you past it, especially if it's like in a completely different realm of what you were working on before. Which, I mean, fine. Some people like have the one thing they want to work on, and some people don't. I guess the other one too is knowing when it's time to just give up on a project.
Yes, I think
I
that's
struggle with
not
that.
that's not said enough. I really do. I think
Right.
yeah, that's a huge one.
Well, and like I told you before, like usually once a year I do a sort of a fall cleaning, and that's a big time for me to go, I'm never going to work on this again. Like,
Yeah.
I had a great idea. It was cool. These have sat in the bin for that project for a year, and I've not touched them.
And you just got to be
It's time
honest
to
with
move on with
yourself.
it.
Am I realistically going to continue this? And if not, get rid. Put some of those supplies back in your general supplies, or just
Right.
see if someone else wants to continue with it, whatever. But get rid, because it's only costing you an emotion. It's an emotional tax, like to have it there and see it, and it's like, oh, I should finish that. Yeah.
Yeah, it usually goes back into like the storage bins, but like, and this was more of a thing when like I worked in an office with people, but some of my friends, especially this is at Red Hat, would always joke that in the fall, because it was usually like around November, that they got to have Maker Christmas, which was when I was cleaning out my office, and I would come in with a bin full of stuff and just have at. Like, I don't want anything for it. Just please take it off my hands. And it was always fun too, because I personally prefer the furry children more than normal ones, but I do have friends that have kids, and I do enjoy seeing the younger generations get into this sort of stuff. So I've had a lot of friends that come by and they're like, ooh, sweet raspberry pies, and like, to me, they're last generation. I don't need those anymore. But to them, it's like, sweet, free Raspberry Pi, and then they can go and their kids learn how to program or do whatever.
That's lovely.
Mind you, a lot of the Raspberry Pis I've given away end up being like small servers for something, because again, it was Red Hat, and it was a lot of uber nerds that were like, oh, I'll run my IRC bouncer on this or something like that.
All of the OctoPrint, yeah.
Oh, or that, yeah. That's the other thing. I have a weird habit of keeping up with newer Raspberry Pis for all of my OctoPrint instances, because I found it does provide a performance boost. My prints finish faster.
Yeah,
it's just kind of a thing.
And I think lots of things recommend using like Pi Zeros and stuff, and they're actually not recommended at all for OctoPrint. You need 3B plus or higher.
Yeah,
like technically it might work using something lower, but it's gonna have issues, and it's not OctoPrint's fault. It's yours.
Right.
Poor Gina.
I know. The Prusa Mark III, they were all like, "Hey, you can just plug a Pi into it, like directly."
And they even have a slot for like a Pi Zero or something, like the and I'm just like, stop! You're killing Gina.
Yeah, I mean, two problems I have with that. A, it's only on when the printer's on, and I don't like leaving my printers on. So it's not helpful to me. Like, so the way I run it is I actually have little Wi-Fi outlet controls on all my printers, and then I have Raspberry Pis that are on with OctoPrint that are always on. I can go to that in my browser and I can turn my printer on.
Yes.
And then I can also have it automatically turn the printer off when it's cooled off, when it's done, and that way they don't stay on. But the OctoPrint instance has to stay up all the time. And a Pi Zero does not. I mean, I had that set up when I first got my first Mark III, and I went to the OctoPrint webpage, and I heard the printer slow down. Because it was serving up. I mean, now that's one of the other things too, where you want to make sure you have a fast SD card, and there's like, things that you can optimize there. But it was like, oh, that's terrible. I'm never using this again. So I ripped it out and put in the Pi 3 or something.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think it's OctoPrint's fault. Like, a lot of people don't have and especially because it's recommended on the Prusa website, which I've had words to certain people about.
Yeah.
Because stop. It's not it's not supported hardware. What are you doing? And like all these people are like, nah, OctoPrint is crap. It made all my prints crap. And it's like, well, actually, it's not meant to run on a Zero. Anyway, yeah.
Working for a living on software that controls hardware, I can tell you, they all think that it's the software's fault. It's just the thing, and I get it. Like, if you don't understand
software magic,
how
doesn't it just solve all problems? Come on.
I mean, I even last year, like at the very beginning of the pandemic, I did some tests because I noticed because they had just come out with the gyroid infill on Prusa Slicer, and I was noticing that some of my prints were taking longer on my Mark III than they were on my Mini, and I thought that was weird. So I did some sort of quantified testing on it, and it turns out that it's just because the Mark III is an 8-bit microcontroller and the Mini is a 32-bit, and the Mark III can't keep up with the serial communications when it's going like this back and forth real fast. If it's straight lines, the time difference would be nothing. But as soon as you turned on gyroid infill, I could literally have files that were the same G-code. I sliced them so that they were technically in different places on the bed, but that meant that all of the positions were the same between them. So like, it was literally identical G-code. If you printed something with gyroid infill on the Mark III versus the Mini over OctoPrint, it was fine over the SD card or the USB. But if it was over OctoPrint, it would be like 20 to 25% slower on the Mark III with the exact same file.
Because it was just reading, like, it just couldn't keep up with reading all those numbers that it was running through.
Because when you do a gyroid infill, it's
like
thousands of tiny line segments, as opposed to one line segment and then one line segment back. So I mean, if you look at the file size, the files will be 10 times bigger for something with a gyroid infill. I mean, it's a great infill, and all the other ones are great too, but it takes up a lot of space because it's lots of small. I mean, I think people don't realize, they see, oh, it's an arc. Well, no, it's tessellated into many small lines, because that's how they work. I mean, there are some CNC systems where you can tell it do an arc.
And I think Marlin technically supports arc, but I don't think any of the common slices, at least, export arcs. It's all small line segments.
Correct. None of them really do. I don't even think that LightBurn supports it, because like it's one of those things where it's more of a it's a CNC milling thing that it's more commonly used in, and it's just never really been frequently implemented on 3D printers,
And it's just not important.
It's never been well supported. Yeah, it's not. I don't think it really matters. I mean, you got to realize, like, that was one of those commands that was created when G code was like first a thing in like the 70s and 80s, and a 1 megabyte CNC job file was enormous.
Yeah,
because you had to fit it on a floppy disk. Whereas now we're like, I don't care.
Oh, man,
I don't
floppy
care.
Disks.
What?
I didn't even think about CNC machines running on floppy disks, but yeah.
Yeah. I think this is the one. Joe Spanier has a CNC lathe that he bought, and I'm pretty sure it has a floppy drive on it.
Wow.
I mean, it's older or as old as both he and I are.
Wow. There you go.
But it's got a legit floppy disk drive on it, because that's what you did. I mean, I've seen some that had like the old like 8-inch like actually floppy disks from the 70s.
Wow. I mean, it makes sense. Like, I just never thought about it before. Like, obviously they weren't running USB. Like, I never really thought about it before.
Yeah. I mean, and storage was a thing that was expensive. So, and you didn't necessarily have network, so you weren't transferring them over the Ethernet to your machine, or, OctoPrint wasn't a thing for CNC machines. So, yeah, it's just, they had to do all these tricks to keep things as tight as possible.
Yeah.
The type of things we do with 3D printers now, where you've got a 20-hour job and the file is 200 megabytes, which I've had, you couldn't do back then.
I every time because I'm not very into coding or anything. I admire it from afar, though, like quite a lot. I really need to just dive in someday. But anyway, every time I hear about all the old school ways that we used to make graphics back in the day when we had very little memory, and all these clever ways that people came up with to like make video games happen and stuff, I just love all of them. Like, they're fascinating. The problem solving behind them is just so cool. Like, there was this one, and it was like connecting all these lines, and it would basically just like, it's almost like an SVG, I suppose, but you just have the coordinates kind of, and then that was a way to make an image, and then there's whole games built like that just are so small file size, and it's just, I don't know, fascinating. I just find that all fascinating.
Oh, totally. I mean, like, games today are, generally raster textures, and then, you're like, 3D models and stuff, but back before it was 3D, it was basically SVG, or I mean, it was vector graphics, maybe drawn onto a raster machine, but you stored them as vector because you literally didn't have the space to do them. And that's like one of the things that was funny with the All Pixel, where I was, so many people that have gotten into programming, sort of after the time that I did, where you're starting with things like Python and JavaScript and not ever dealing with memory management or things like that. This is one of the things where, like, Arduino's awesome, but I really wish that people would more like kind of dive into it and like really understand the internals sometimes, at least if they're interested. Like, I like to see when people do that, because like someone asked me something about the firmware with the All Pixel, and I said, well, it only uses 100 bytes of RAM for the main program, because it uses the other 2200 or 2300 bytes that was available for pixel buffer, because you had to support a specific number of LEDs, and we had to buffer all of them before we could send them out. So I only had so many bytes of RAM to use for the actual program. And he said to me, how do you know? I said, I counted. Like, I just went through and counted how many bytes it was using. I mean, not like a computer where you can look at Task Manager. So like, yeah, things like that to me are still fascinating. I love working on, firmware code where you have to get things done in the smallest space possible and do it super efficiently. Otherwise, you just don't have the room for it. It must be
such a skill. Like, I don't know. I remember Zach Friedman back on that train. I remember him talking about how he has a whole AI on like a Tinsy or something for his power glove, where he can write in midair. He can write letters in midair, and it predicts what he's writing, so he can input into his like. And I'm like, how do you fit it's not really, I don't know, like a trained algorithm that can calculate what you're moving around in space, and then like just like that enough.
Yeah, neural network stuff is well out of my knowledge, but yeah,
you're talking on the byte level, like that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and for the stuff I do for the day job, I still have to deal with that because we write everything in C or C++.
Wow.
I mean, there are lots of wrappers around things, but sometimes I just have to deal with direct, memory access of things to make things faster. I mean, like, it's great that you can do things through web and whatnot, but I'm a bit old and curmudgeon-y when it comes to things where I'm like, no, I want to do things in C++ the way we used to do it.
Well, I mean, if you're dealing with hardware, it kind of makes sense to be more direct, though, right? Like, there's less in the way between.
Well,
is that I don't know. Is that correct?
No, it does. I mean, because if you look at it, like, one of the times for one of the first conversations I had with Jason, who created LightBurn, he was telling me about how, and I had the same thoughts when I had tried to use LightBurn. He was telling me, people very often will ask him, well, when is the G code generated? Is it generated as it's streaming to the laser? And we're like, no, we do it as soon as you click send. And they're like, well, yeah, but it's a huge job. When does it get generated? As soon as you click send. It's milliseconds. I mean, a large job might take 10 seconds or something like that, for a really, really large thing. And that's because it's all written in C.
Wow.
It's really, really low level stuff. I mean, there is definitely a place for Python. I was a Python developer for 10 years as well. Like, that
like,
I use a lot.
Terrified of coding.
and no, that's fine. And like,
I thought I couldn't code until I tried Python, and then I'm like, oh my god, I actually can, and this is actually really fun, and I can actually. It's like that XKCD comic, right? Where it's like, I just imported Fly or whatever it was. Have you seen that one? Do you know the one I'm talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because with Python, inevitably you can import something that will do the thing that you need, and then it just works. And that's one of the reasons I still love Python. Aside from it gets people into programming, but like also, if I'm doing something and I just need to do it quick and I need to get it done quickly, great, Python. If I need something to be done millions of times quickly, I'll take the extra time to write it in a lower level language and then do that. It's kind of weird. Like, I enjoy programming, but I like building hardware probably more than that at this point. But programming lets me do all this stuff, so it's fine.
Yeah.
I don't know.
They're both different kinds of problems to solve, really. So,
right.
Kind of...
the thing that I like with hardware is I can make something and then be done with it. And then, like I was telling you at the beginning, I kind of I'm like, okay, I know how to do that, and now I want to move on. Whereas, I mean, at least like with LightBurn, like the problems are always very different, and I'm always working on new things. But I have worked in other jobs where it's like, cool, we're done with this release. Now let's make it slightly different and do it all over again.
Yeah, no, that would kill me. That would kill my soul.
That is soul crushing. Like, with the stuff I'm working on now, it is a lot different in that, like, I'm always adding new and interesting features and stuff like that. So it's always a different problem. It's working on the same, piece of software, but it is always something new, and we've got people always coming to us with new things, and it's kind of nice to have just a small team like that, just being two of us, where someone will say something on the forum, they're like, hey, it would be cool if it would do this, and I'll be like,
that would be cool.
All right, done. And then 10 minutes later, it's in the it's in the next build or whatever.
That's cool.
It's nice.
Yeah, I remember you talking about some of the things like line finding and all that sort of stuff. Like, is it line finding? Wait, but it sounds like really interesting.
It was intersection finding.
Yes, intersection finding. That's exactly it. Yeah.
As I said to Jason, this was one of the first times in my life I've ever actually used the math that I learned in college.
Yeah.
Or even high school with that.
Any Bezier curve can intersect itself 4 times or something like that. I remember you vaguely. I'm doing it wrong. 9 times. Yeah. Oh my god, 9.
think it's 9 times. Yeah, because it's like a cube root thing. Because we had intersecting of 2 lines, like, so just single, like, double point lines. But then when you have a Bezier curve, then you've got all the control points and you've got the full curve. Trying to figure out where those intersect, and then especially because a Bezier curve can intersect with itself. Which gets complicated. So that was one of those things where I spent
so for anyone who doesn't know what a Bezier curve is, it's like a curve with handles, like intent. When you like, it's like a curve. It's like a line, but it's actually curvy because you've got little handles and like an Illustrator or whatever, and you like pull them, and it changes the direction of the line. I just thought I should probably. That's kind of vaguely it, right?
It makes sense to anyone who's used graphic design software, but that's the Bezier curve.
It's more complicated on the back end, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. So in our case, we were using cubic curves because you can actually use like n levels of what is it, exponent. It gets into calculus and it's weird. But yeah, with cubic curves they can intersect, I think it's 9 times, and intersect with themselves once. It's impossible to make them intersect more than that. But yeah, I spent a couple of months because we were adding a feature to trim between lines or between paths. So you could say like you've got a U shape and then you've got a line that goes across it, and you want to trim out the line between the 2 legs of the U.
Gotcha.
You would just click on that. But this is one of the things I love about computer science. There are things that are immensely easy for us as humans and god awful difficult for computers.
Yeah, like
because,
obviously that one encloses that one. Come on, computer.
Yes,
but like, yeah.
Yeah, obviously the line intersects in those 2 places. What is your problem?
Yeah.
That is such a difficult problem when you're dealing with it with a computer, and especially when you've got like vast complex designs where you're like, okay, does this line intersect with any of these other shapes? And there's thousands of them, which you can simplify that by doing things like checking bounds. Like, does this shape, the bounds of this shape, even intersect with the bounds of this shape? If not, well, then those shapes don't intersect. So then you can leave that out. But yeah, that was one of those things where like I had to really dig deep into math stuff and like figure out how to do Bezier to Bezier intersections so that we could do those trims. And it's still to this day one of like my like proudest features on that is just that works because I know all the math that went into it. I've forgotten all the math now, but
you did at the time, and that's all that counts. Yeah,
right. I can go and look at the code now if I need.
Did you like reach out to anybody, or was that like lots of Googling and Wolfram Alphaing and like, or did you kind of just work it out yourself?
I love Wolfram Alpha.
Oh my god, how good is it? It got me through. Like you can get it for like really cheap on Windows. Like it's normally a subscription, but if you go to the Windows store, there's like this version, and it's so cheap. And I'm like, oh man, I have that now.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah, I usually just use like the free web one. No, it was a lot of Googling. It actually came down to a PhD paper that someone had done years ago on Bezier. Like I just found a white paper on it, and it had the math, but it didn't have like any code for it. So I couldn't just be like, sweet, here's some code and take that. So we had to just sort of take it from there and then massage that into some code. I literally never found any other code that would do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, because I a while ago was trying to make the SVG to G code converter, and thankfully someone else did it for me. But but I did get a decent way. But I got to the point where I'm like, I should work out how to do circles and curvy things and stuff, because I could do straight lines fine and it was working. But like circles and curves and stuff. And then I'm like, then I dove into the Bezier curve thing, and I'm like, oh man, this gets deep fast. Like, I just wanted to like break the curve up into little segments, and I didn't really know how to do that. And I didn't think I even knew you at the time. I would have asked you had I known you, but yeah.
That's one of those things where I'd probably go, I could tell you how to do that, but I can't because it's in code that's proprietary.
Fair enough.
But
well,
I could have at least pointed you to like that is known code.
You could point me to some stuff, yeah. But I was just like digging around, and I didn't know how to code too, so it was really hard.
Yeah, that is code that exists. I think there's actually a Python library to tessellate a Bezier. Like it just exists.
Okay.
If you ever go back into that again, so that is one of those things that's a solved problem. The intersections is a much more complicated problem for obvious reasons.
I can't even imagine.
No, tessellating a Bezier curve is relatively simple. It's not, but I mean, it's a solved problem that could be done. But yeah, I don't envy anyone trying to write their own G-code converter, because that's a non-trivial thing. Like I even for the cyberplotter when I did and this is one of the things I forgot to talk about. I knew there was another tool on that. Is the camera tool head.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Please.
So that was when I got into what, because of course cyberplotter, so of course I had to call it hyperzoom. So it's a 4K USB camera with a macro microscope lens on it. And that was hooked up. So I actually so it's like on the tool head. And then basically my idea with that was, okay, I've got this like super accurate, precise, motion system. And I could then move the camera around and then take pictures, like at different places. So I actually had to write some software for that, and I wrote it all in Python with, was it PyQt or one of those, like one of the UI implementations. And yeah, I had to like write all the stuff for communicating with it. Or no, I think eventually do you remember Pronterface? It always used to come with Cura. So they have a library that comes with that they've never actually released as a library, but if you download Pronterface, like the file's there, and it's called Print Run, I think. And if you import that, you can then just communicate with a printer and like do G-code handling. And like it'll do all the serial handling and threaded. It was really cool. But I still had to like generate all the G-code and do all that stuff for like, okay, move to the spot, and then generate a grid that's 50 by 60 in 2mm increments and go around and do all the pictures and whatnot. That was the easy part. The hard part was figuring out how to stitch a 2 gigapixel picture together. And there is proprietary software to do that. Like there's a piece of hardware called the GigaPan, which is more for taking like gigapixel panoramics. So like you put a camera and it's like on a swiveled servo mount, and then it'll stitch all those together.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. You'll often see them doing that. Like I think there was one that came out like from the most recent inauguration in the United States here, where like the whole Capitol and stuff, and you get everything, and you can zoom way in because the pictures are taken zoomed way in, but then they're just
like
shot around.
Astrophotograph, like taking photographs of
yeah,
space.
they do the same thing. Like although the thing I always find fun with that is like often you go, okay, so they're moving the telescope and taking pictures, whereas
but
very
they have to
often
move it in the right, or the Earth moves, right? Or they have to track it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Very well. That's the thing. There are some where if they're wanting to take a pano, they'll just take a picture every 1 second, but then the Earth is moving, so it does it for them. And then there's some where they have to, if they want to stay on a celestial body, then they have to track it. Because
sometimes they'll like open the lens for a long time to get more light in, right? Like,
right. Yeah, you can do a long exposure.
It's figuratively, but yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. That was to a complete other tangent. That was one of the other fun things to do with LEDs was we built a long exposure like display. It was really weird. It was literally a like 3 meter long pole with a bunch of LEDs on it, and it wasn't a persistence of vision display because you specifically had to do it like with a long exposure. But like I, for example, like loaded in an image of like the entire Super Mario Brothers 2 World 1, and then you would just walk along with this, and it would take the pictures.
That is so cool. That is so cool.
That was fun. I mean, you can do, if you can get some LEDs to go fast enough, you can do full persistence of vision stuff where like as it moves, then you see it. I actually did that. I built a lightsaber basically with that, that was fun. That was one of the other fun parts.
Cool.
See, I did like the LED stuff, but eventually it got to be too much LED stuff, and I had to move on to other things.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool, though. I love it. Yeah, I love those persistence of vision things. Like you can get little computer fans and stuff that say stuff, and I was like, oh, I want that on my 3D printers. But they know the wrong voltage, and I don't know how to deal with that. But it was cool. Yeah. See, this is how
definitely
baby
cool
I am. Yeah.
Yep. But sorry, so it's like tangents upon tangents, but it's the way my brain works.
That's what we're about. Yeah. So the camera mount you're making, was that to fill a certain purpose, or was it just because it's really freaking neat? Like I'm thinking, like,
really I remember. Neat.
Okay, cool. Because I remember seeing like bug pictures where someone had done focus stacking, and like they were just so incredible. Right. But then you could do all kinds of things with that. Yeah. Yeah,
and that's what I wanted to do, and I need to get back to that. It was one of those where like it's not that I lost interest in the project; it was just I gained interest in other projects at the time. So I kind of had moved on to some other stuff. But yeah, that was all. It was just I thought it would be really cool to do. I also in sort of earlier years I was really into doing high resolution panoramas. So like with a normal DSLR camera and then taking 40 or 50 images and then stitching them all together. Back when earlier in my career I worked at a company that made Photoshop plugins. I had a beefy, crazy Mac Pro with like dual Xeon processors and stuff, and I used to at lunch stitch panos on that because it was the only machine I had with enough RAM to do it. So I would do stuff like that. So I come back from vacation and like load them up over like a couple of weeks at lunch. I would stitch panoramas.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
That was fun. So yeah, that was kind of what got me into that. But like instead of massive wide vistas, it was a 2 gigapixel image of a penny.
Yeah.
or something like really, really tiny.
Yeah.
Data management on that got to be a pain too, because that's just huge amounts of data and huge numbers of pixels or huge numbers of photos for each one.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Oh,
yeah.
So
I should
cool
get back
though.
to that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's fast. I've only kind of done a cursory glance, I suppose, into that world, but even just like, I didn't realize you could take a burst of photos and then stack them on top of each other and get a clearer image. Like, I think I'd
Right.
sort of learned about it somewhere along the way because of the stars photography stuff, but like, just for everyday stuff, you can just like burst that and then stick them into
typically
something
that's
and just like clear up any
exposure
grain
stacking.
or whatever. Yeah, exposure
Yeah.
stacking. But just
So
like
that's-
stacking images in general, stitching them together to make a big panorama, or stitching like through the focus stacking thing where you have a different
Right.
focal lengths or whatever. Like all of that stuff is just like, I think underutilized. I don't know. It's like very neat. You can get more
I'm
out
sure
of your
there's plenty of
hardware.
people that
Like,
use it.
yeah.
I'm sure there's plenty of people that use it. Like even my quadcopter drone has a exposure stacking mode where it'll take like 6 pictures in a row and then make an HDR photo out of it or whatever.
Nice.
Which is nice when you want to get that for whatever, if you like that particular effect.
I just mean even just clearer though, not necessarily changing the exposure, just like taking a bunch at the same and then you just get a less grainy image. Like,
right.
Because you just average them almost.
I guess I haven't played with it. I haven't seen it. Normally when I see it, it's usually like for sort of high dynamic range photos. But I can see how that would also reduce the grain because it's properly exposed at all the right parts.
Yeah.
Man, it's been a while. I haven't thought about photography stuff in a long time, so I'm rusty on it.
No, it's very cool. It's very cool. Oh, this has been so great. I can't believe how much time has passed already. What's next for you? What's upcoming in your world? What are you working on? What are you?
I'm trying to think. I always have a bunch of things like kind of rolling around. I've been working on another plotter, which I may or may not get back to, that uses the old sheet feed like paper with like the parts that you can rip off on the side.
Yes.
From the old dot matrix printers. Like I was playing around with that. I need to get back to that, but like I was playing around with 3D printing TPU belts that would drive that, have like little nubs on them to engage with the paper. Been working on that. I've been working on a 3D printer design. That's one of those that's like a complete feature creep project. That of course, like the right thing to do, because I've done heavy mods to 3D printers where I've like redesigned a lot of them, but I've never done one from scratch. And this is, as I said to Joe Spanier, like I'm doing this not because I need it, but because I want to prove to myself that I can do it. And the right thing to do would have been to start with something easy, like a basic, like i3 style printer. But instead, the machine that I've got the design going for is the 400 millimeters cubed and uses triple lead screws, Z leveling, and is IDEX, and it's just
yeah, all right.
But like,
but that's you have the skills and it's
me.
Fun and yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It'll take a while to do, and it's going to be a crazy project. But that's kind of that's one of the things I'm working on. One of the other things that I guess I should give a shout out to, because it hasn't gotten I don't think it's gotten enough eyes on it. Another project I did recently that like I kind of forgot about, because like I did it and then finished. So for anyone that has Duet based 3D printers, you know what the Duet boards are, right?
The dishiest 3D printing board on the planet. Yeah.
They're awesome. Yeah, I have 3 printers with them in there. And one of the problems I always had with those was like, it's great that you can go to the little web interface and you can edit the configs. But it's a pain when you want to edit a bunch of the configs. Like if you're like doing a new printer and you're like changing them a lot, and it was either like pop out the SD card, do them in my normal editor, put them back in the printer, try them, or like keep going between pages. And sometimes I want to have multiple files up. So because I'm a software nerd and I use Git, the source control tool, all the time, I wrote a tool called RRGit, or RepRapGit, because it's like RepRap firmware. And basically it is a Git-like interface with console interface to your RepRap firmware / Duet printer. So you can clone down the config, and then you have all the files local, which then also allows you to use regular Git to then back them up. Because that's one of the other things is like I have the configs or the Prusa slicer profiles and everything backed up in GitHub for all of my stuff. every time I change it. I mean, maybe not every time I change those, but usually I try to back them up once a month or whatever. That way I can kind of get back to old stuff. I'm a bit of a digital pack rat like that. But so you can clone them down. You can, modify files locally, push them back up to the machine. You can do a pull to pull change files down to your local system.
That's
or
so much better.
My favorite feature is the watch feature, where you can just run get watch on the directory you're in, and then as you change files, it automatically pushes them to the printer.
That is
immediately.
So good. Oh, that's so good. Yes.
So especially, and that one of the beauties of the Duet boards is you can change those config files while it's printing, and then have them immediately take effect. And as I noted to someone on Twitter the other day, don't change your tool changer docking scripts while you're printing. That's a bad idea. I don't know why I would know this, but it was a bad idea. But I've totally had times where it's running too high of an acceleration. Let me just change that, and
that's what I was thinking. Acceleration. Yeah,
right.
Being able to change that mid-print would be wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, or I've done things like I changed the tool change purge script, so that it purged less filament on tool changes and stuff like that. I mean, it's obviously useful for things other than tool changers, but so you can just change the file and push it back up. So that one, it's on GitHub. If you just look for rrgit on there, it's also on. You can also just install it with pip because it's all Python. But hopefully people will find it handy.
I mean, that's a million times better than taking out the SD card and flashing it and putting back. That's so good.
Right.
So good.
And I love the Duet interface. It's beautiful, but you can only work on one file at a time. I've literally opened up 2 browser windows so that I could have 2 different Duet configs open at the same time. And then as soon as you save them, it goes away. And I'm like, no, I want it. I want to see it here. And as an editor a programmer, why can't I think of the words? As a programmer for a living, I'm used to having my whole editing suite with all of the files up, and that's just the way that I work. Or doing things like using the editor to search and replace.
Have you talked to Duet about this? Because it sounds like something that they could put in by default. That would be beneficial to every. Have you shown them this?
No. I mean, I think that they're aware of it because I tagged them on Twitter when I posted about it. But I don't know. I probably should ping them on that some more. Just to see if that'd be more something that they could talk about. It's not something that would ship with the firmware. It's a tool that you can use for it. And actually, it was only made possible by, I can't remember his last name, Andy from E3D. He's one of the guys that did the code, not the hardware design, but the code for the assemble, or ASMBL.
Yeah, he's youngish, isn't he? He's sort
of CNC for things. Yeah, but he wrote a Python Duet API library, which I use.
Gotcha.
I was actually about to write my own, and then I found his, and then I was like, no, never mind, I won't write that. Although then, along with the Duets, another thing that you may find helpful, just for pimping all my projects right now.
Yeah, do it. That's what you're here for.
and Joe from Project Red or Project R3D, right? Yeah. So I had one of the first Daedalus. One of the earlier Daedalus. I had a beta, and one of the things that I worked on him, he actually hired me to do the code for. But it's open source. There's a tool I wrote called USB Pi-Fi. That one of the problems that we had with the Daedalus was that when you first get it started, they don't have an HDMI port broken out on it. And getting your Wi-Fi set up initially, or no, I guess there is, but normally you would have to hook up a monitor and then do some console stuff to set up the Wi-Fi, and it's a pain in the butt. So now he ships all those printers with that, and I need to talk to Duet about getting it included on the base Duet Pi image, because that would be awesome. But it's set up where you just plug in a USB drive with a Wi-Fi config file on it, and then boot the machine. And so this is obviously for the Duet 3s that use the single board computer Raspberry Pi setup thing. Not the regular Duets, unfortunately. But if you have one of the 3s that uses that, And although you could use this on any Pi, it works.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to say. It works on any Pi. Yeah, and this is a problem with all Pis. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the problem is when you have a headless machine that is not necessarily convenient, because like the official Raspberry Pi solution is pop the SD card out, put the WPA supplicant.conf file on the SD card on the boot partition, and then put it back in the machine. Well, what if the SD card is jammed into the back of a printer or a kiosk or whatever?
Or you're just sending them out to people already and they're not necessarily totally technically competent and, you know, all that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So instead, you stick the Wi-Fi config file on the USB, stick it in, turn it on, wait a few minutes. It'll detect that file's there, configure the Wi-Fi, and then write a file back out to the USB that tells you what the IP address of the machine is.
Yes.
Assuming it has configured
Freaking magic. Yeah. That should come with Raspberry Pis by default in my...
I agree. And that's one of those projects that was truly started as because I was talking to Joe about this. I'm like, it annoys me that they've never done this. Why have they never done this?
I will introduce you to someone. Yes. Okay. I totally forgot. I will introduce you to someone. We'll talk after the break.
After the thing? Okay.
Yeah, cool. maybe it'll be an in. Because I think that would be good for everybody with a Raspberry Pi. Because I remember we had little robots that ran on Raspberry Pis that we would take to schools, and we'd have to get a Wi-Fi set up. And sometimes we had two different Wi-Fis because one of them might not work. Like, it was all a little bit janky. But, you know, sometimes that Wi-Fi wouldn't work, and then we'd try and use the other one, and you'd have to redo all the Wi-Fi. And if you could just... That would make life so much easier.
I have literally gone to events like East Coast Rough Draft Festival or maker fairs that I've exhibited at, where I bring my own Wi-Fi access point.
We did, yeah.
So that the machines were already know that, but then sometimes that doesn't work because there's 8,000 other Wi-Fi access points there, and
and they would intersect with each other. Yeah, so we had a few Wi-Fi troubles, but that would have been so good to be able to just really quickly redo them, and without needing to hook them up to a computer, like a monitor and keyboard, and yes, 100 times yes.
So again, USB Pi also on GitHub. So, and thanks to Joe from Project R3D for sponsoring that particular one.
He's
it was because he wanted it for himself, but he's super nice and always lets me release these things as open source because you might as well have them.
He's so wonderful. I love Joe.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, where can people find you if they want to keep up with all your amazing things? Where do you hang out? And
I hang out on Twitter. At Dreadmaker Adam, is a reference to Dread Pirate Roberts for those who haven't seen the wonderful Princess Bride. I'm usually on there. On GitHub, it's Adam M. Haile on GitHub is my username. There's literally hundreds of repositories on there of all my various projects over the years. And even, if you want to find my Prusa Slicer configs, they're on there too, because I keep everything on there and usually not private. So yeah, that's where I am. I'm in various Discords and stuff, like the Makers on Tap Discord and the Friday night maker things and stuff. But
Matt Stoltz's one. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm on Matt Stoltz's one. I lurk around on there from time to time.
Awesome. Sure. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so glad we did this. Yeah, you make such amazing things.
Thank you for having me.
It's been real fun. Thank you.
Awesome. It has been. No problem. Thanks for having me.
See you on the internet. Bye.
Cool. Bye.
I am loving making this series, and if you are too, please support me on Patreon so I can keep making more. Top supporters will appear in this list of legends. You can meet another maker here, and here's a video YouTube thinks you'll like. If you want to catch up with any of us, all our socials are in the description below. See you later!